Good morning. This is Earth Skills with Jeff Gottlieb. I was thinking about, what we do in the wintertime on our homesteads and in our houses, and a lot of people are less busy and they have more downtime. And one of the most important things you could do with your downtime is to maintain all of your tools. You really can't get good work done if you don't have the right tools and don't keep them in proper working order. And one of the most important parts of tool care for any sort of cutting tool is sharpening. So we're going to go over how to take care of steel cutting tools and how to sharpen them. How to see if they're sharp enough to use and how that works and what to do about it. I'll show you different tools that I use for sharpening, and I'll show you exact techniques that I use for sharpening. So we all have cutting tools. Even if you never go out of the house and you don't do any sort of outdoor things at all, you probably have scissors for cutting paper. You have kitchen knives. You have, any number of different tools that cut. And they can be large and heavy, like wood splitting axes, or they can be fine and delicate, tiny little paring knives and small whittling blades. So we'll look at a bunch of different kinds of cutting tools and how to take care of them. The first most important thing about tool care is just making sure that you put them away safe from what's going to harm them. So what is going to harm them? Rust. What does that mean to put it away? Well, never leave it outside unattended where it might get rained on or suffer from the dew overnight, or even just fog or humidity. Things will rust. If you have a sharp edge and rust begins on it, it will not only not be sharp, it will actually destroy the edge and require a lot of work to straighten it out again. So the most important thing is put your tools away when you're done with them. And if you've used them and they've gotten wet, wipe them down carefully and put a little oil on them. That's another thing. Wipe them with an oily cloth. Now, I might have a different technique for kitchen knives that are going to be cutting food. If it's a wood carving knife or an axe for cutting or a pair of scissors, I would wipe those with light machine oil. This particular oil that I have is called honing oil, and it comes for use with sharpening equipment, but it's also pretty much the same formula as light machine oil or sewing machine oil, anything like that. And so you can take a paper towel and you can just put a little oil on a paper towel or cloth. I like using cloth because you get to use it again and again and again. And then just wipe the metal parts of the tool with the oily cloth. You don't need to slather it on. It doesn't need to be dripping when you're finished. You'd probably be just as well that you can't even see any oil when you're all done. But it's oiled and it's fairly well protected, and you're okay. Another thing about maintaining tools is how you use them. I see people who in the kitchen will use glass cutting boards or cut against ceramic plates with their knives. See, this is why we have serrated knives, so that you could press against something that is never meant to be cut against, and you still have sharp areas in all the incurves. So that's why serrated knives are good. Not only for cutting fibrous and easily torn stuff like bread, but also so that you can, like a steak knife, you can press it against the plate, cut your food on your plate, and you don't damage the edge. If you have a straight type of blade, non-serrated, and you use a glass cutting board or you use a plate, you will dull it, because the ceramic and glass also, they're both harder than the steel that the knife is made of, considerably. So if you take a piece of steel and you rub it on a piece of glass or ceramic, you will You will wear down the steel and you will dull it. Okay, what are we doing when we sharpen it? We're going to do a few things. One is we're going to produce an edge angle called a bevel. Okay? So if you can imagine looking at the blade at this angle, the camera probably can't see much of it. That's good. That's what we want. Okay. So what's happening is I can look straight down on this blade, and if I'm looking at it from this way, I can see that it has basically the vertical plane of the tool and two angles that come up to it. So the type of tool you have governs what edge angle you want. And the edge angle is measured from vertical to one side, not the full side. So let's say if they say that they recommend sharpening kitchen knives to a 20-degree angle, that's vertical to this way is 20 degrees. All right? That's about 20 degrees. So the total is 40 degrees. And if you have a heavy-duty knife that you use for, heavy camp work, you're making tent stakes and cutting through oak knots and things like that, you might want 25 degrees or even more. Or you could just not do that with a knife. Pick a different tool. Never ask a tool to do what it's not designed to do unless you have no choice. Like you're in a survival situation and the only thing you have is just one tool. Then you have to use it for whatever is needed. But that's not true in our houses. We have too much junk. We probably have every tool for the job, especially if you're like me and you really like tools. So I have more knives than I know how to count. That's just because I'm not good at counting. Yeah. So what we're dealing with is how to produce those two angles and make those two angles meet at a vanishing point. How do I know my knife is dull? Well, one thing you can do is to look straight down on the edge. See, if the two edge angles don't meet at a vanishing point, they're going to meet at a rounded or flattened surface because you've worn it off. In which case, light will reflect off of it. So you could look at the edge of the blade and it will catch light. You could see a shiny strip at the edge. Really dull knives, that is true. You can see a shiny strip along the edge. Okay. What do you have to do about that? Well, you have to do a couple of things. You have to cut off metal and you have to push steel molecules around. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So, another test for a knife, if it might be pretty sharp and you want it to be really sharp, you want to know if it's really sharp, put the edge on your thumbnail, tilt the top back towards you a little bit, and try and slide the knife. This knife will slide, so it's not very sharp. See? If it were really sharp, it would just grip, and it would not slide on my thumbnail. So that's a good one. That works real well. You'll also see people showing off, shaving the hair on their forearms with their freshly sharpened knives. That sure does show that a knife is very sharp. The drawback is hair is very hard to cut through, and you just dulled the knife. So, just to say, haha, look how sharp it is. Now it isn't. So, back to the sharpening. All right. So, how are we going to do this? If you have a tool that is either kind of very large and coarse, like a splitting axe, you wouldn't sharpen your scalpel this way. You wouldn't sharpen your finest paring knife or your whittling tools. You would want to work on coarse tools. You would start with a file. This is a fine-toothed file. Let's see. I believe this is a mill bastard cut, and it's a fine metal file. Not all files are alike. Files can be case hardened, or they can be tempered through and through. Case hardened files are cheaper, where you get, pretty much it's very hard to find American or European made files. You can find European made files, they're very expensive, several times the price of what you can find in the hardware store. But everything you find in the hardware store is now imported from Mexico, South America, China, places where they're making cheap tools. And we're asking a file to do a difficult thing. See, a file works great on materials that are considerably softer than it. You want to work on the edge of a PVC pipe to get all the rough spots off of it. You can do it with this file. You can file PVC till you're a very old man or woman, and you'll never wear out the file that way. You can file copper or brass or aluminum because they're still a lot softer. But what we are filing is tool steels that are nearly as hard as the file. So it is very easy to wear out a file. So you have to be careful how you use it, and you can't expect very long life out of it. We'll talk about knife steels in a moment. No, that's a good time to talk about knife steels. Depending on what the alloys of the steel are and how the knife was tempered, it could be on the softer side or on the harder side. And there are advantages to doing both things. If it's tempered on the softer side, you have a tool that could bend a tiny bit without snapping. If you have a tool that is hard, you could drop it on the floor and it could shatter or chip. So if you have a knife, you might actually drop it on the floor sometime. The other issue is when you sharpen a tool that's on the harder side of tempered, it keeps an edge longer. Softer tools, you can sharpen them easily, you can make metal move, but then they're going to get dull again. So there's kind of a happy medium, and the tool maker has to pick. And then it's up to us, the tool buyers, to know what it is we're shopping for, and know what it is we're going to do with the tool, and know how often we're really willing to work on it, and just how sharp we're going to need it. So if we know those things and we make an informed decision, okay, that's fine. So something like a fine, expensive hunting knife might be tempered quite hard because you're expected to cut meat with it and rope and maybe wood, things like that. But a less expensive pocket knife. This is a pocket knife. It's made by Buck, and Buck tools can be the older ones that are kind of the original Buck line are very, very hard steel. They take an edge. They hold it forever. Very fine grained steel. But the inexpensive line of pocket knives nowadays are softer. So you can get them sharp. You can use them for a while, and you just got to go back and sharpen them again. So that's not an issue if you know how to sharpen and you have the tools and you know what to do. So, okay. So what do you do? Well, first of all, if you have a knife or a larger tool that requires a lot of metal to come off of it, you're sharpening, you're splitting wedges, you've got a knife that somebody hands you and says, "Can you help me sharpen this?" And they have been abusing it for 20 years. They say, "It won't cut food. It won't cut wood. It won't cut anything." And you look, and it's got this broad, shiny edge along the top. You're going to have to move a lot of metal before it's sharp. You really have to establish two flat surfaces that meet at a vanishing point. So, how do you do that? You take the file. Now, the file has tooth ridges cut into it. So, it is designed to take material off when pushed forward and or pushed to the right. So, you can file straight, you can file straight to the right, or any combination of the above. And the teeth are angled towards that direction, so that's the way to do it. So you might actually get the kind of cut you want pushed sideways rather than straight. it may do less vibrating and chattering if you go sideways. So anyway, what you must not do at all costs when working with knife steel or anything except like plastic and wood, you must never push it forward and then slide it backwards. Because if you do, you're going to press the teeth of the file up against the body of the file, and they will never lift again, and now you have a slug of metal not good for taking material off anything. So give it to a blacksmith friend of yours if you want, and let them, heat it up, pound it out, make something out of it, whatever they're going to make. A set of door hinges or a knife or something. So your file should remain rust-free. You should keep it lightly oiled, and you should keep it in a sleeve or a container so that it doesn't bang up against other tools and press the teeth down. So even if you do all that, if you file knives, you're going to wear them out. You're going to wear files out. But it's the only game in town. Buy the best files you can. I recommend European made. They work better and last longer, and you'd have to do a cost analysis to see. If they're 3 times the price, do they last 3 times as long? I don't know. Do they cut 3 times as well? I don't know. So, that would be something I'd love to hear about. Okay, so I've got a knife. It's terrible. I have to fix it. So what am I going to do? I am going to immobilize the tool, and I'm going to do that with a block of wood. I can take the tip of it just anywhere where I can make it hold really still. Now, here's something tricky. If I press this file to the knife, I'm looking at it from above it. I'm not really seeing the angle I think I'm seeing. So it takes some experience and maybe somebody else looking at it from another angle to tell you. If you say, I'm trying to press this against it at 20 degrees, they could look at it from this side and tell you whether that looks like 20 degrees from the other side. Because I'm looking at it downward. I might have it wrong. So I'm going to always lift the file. I'm never going to slide it back and forth. If your knife has been in fairly good repair, you probably don't have to file it. You probably can go right to sharpening stones and other tools. But I'm just showing you what we need to do. And again, you see that I'm moving forward and to the right. How do I know I've done enough? Okay. If I have ground all the way to that meeting point up at the top, and I keep going for just a fraction of a second longer, I'm going to be doing something that very few materials can do, but steel can do. Steel is what we call malleable, and it's exactly what blacksmiths do. They heat it up, and when they hit it with a hammer, it squishes and spreads out like clay. Right? The mass of clay is still the mass of clay, whether the molecules are over there or they're over here. And you could squish it. You could take the clay and you could slide it until those molecules slide along the surface and move. Steel will do the same thing. So if you do this with a tool and you grind and push, grind and push, grind and push, you're going to get steel molecules that get slid out past all their fellows, and they're hanging out in space. They are in a little curl that you can feel. The molecules curl over the edge, and if you slide outward from the underside, you can feel them. That's how you know you've gone as far as you need to go to get this ready. So, I'm almost there. Now, what I'm doing this freehand. This takes a lot of practice. Most people would tell you to immobilize the tool in some way. if you have very steady hands and you practice, 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 you can get it to where you can just do it from holding it. Alright, so I can now feel a tiny little burr. So, is this sharp? Sort of. It's thin, and it's got ragged little bits clinging to where they curled over. If you're very steady and the tool you used is smooth with no problems, you can produce a curled over section that's like a little filament of steel. And people call it a wire edge or a burr. So what's my next job? My next job is to flip the tool over and do the same thing on the other side. So basically, everything I do is going to work that wire edge off to one side and then back to the other side. And then I'm going to go to a finer grit and work the burr to one side and work it to the other side. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. So I have to now do exactly what I did in one direction, the opposite way. You can get to the edge by resting it this way. Okay. If I did it, then I've got the wire edge now on the other side. That's good. Okay. Important. When I work my way down to the next size grit of sharpening material, I should wipe off all the bits that I raised the other way, because those little particles. Okay, the next thing that I'm doing now, not only am I moving the wire edge back and forth, I am managing scratches, scratch size. Because you can imagine, the file teeth will have spacing that's a certain size, and when you're all done doing your filing, you'll be able to see tiny little grooves that you made with the file. So, is it sharp now? Well, except for the wire edge, it's what we would call rough sharp. If you produce this edge on an axe, you would just touch it up a little bit to get the wire edge off, and you're done. That's all you need to do with an axe. Unless it's a special axe for fine woodworking, like if you're a spoon carver and you're doing very very small work carefully with your woodworking axe, and you're creating shapes you want. You're carving. You're not just hacking. Then you would go ahead and work your edge finer and finer and finer. Okay, so now I have a wire edge and I have file textured scratches. What do we do next? Well, I need a finer grit, and in most cases, what's available and kind of what people are most familiar with are sharpening stones, which are either going to be natural stone that's actually quarried, cut in blocks, and kind of ground finished, or they're going to be a man-made carborundum. And carborundum is hard. Carborundum is the same material that rubies are made out of. It's very hard. It's in like an 8 something on the hardness scale. The steel is in the high 5s. So, what we're going to do is rub the same faces that we were filing on the sharpening stone. Okay, so that the wire edge is on the bottom now, so that is what's going to be next. So, you have to lubricate a stone. Why? Because if you just ground the steel against the stone, it would cut steel, it would grind it, and all of the little particles get stuck in the holes in the stone. So, if the stone didn't have ups and downs, it wouldn't cut. So as soon as you fill it with steel particles, it won't cut. And a lot of people will take these sharpening stones that are all clogged and say, it's no good, it's ruined. And they'll just dump it with the other contents of their garage they don't need, and it'll end up in a junk shop or somewhere. Buy those, because there's nothing wrong with them. What do? Well, all you have to do is to get the gunk and the bits of steel out of it. That's really easy. Put a hot batch of dishwater with plenty of dish soap and hot water, and just soak it in there for a couple of hours. And then get a soft brush, like a brass brush or a bristles brush, and just scrub it. It'll come so clean, and you'll be right back to functional, no problem. So you might, a new one of these might be $8, $10, I don't know. The natural stone ones are more. They don't work any better, but they're a natural product. But in the junk shop, if they want more than $1, don't pay it, because there's millions of them around for $1. All right. So how do you keep the steel from getting stuck in the stone? You either put plenty of soapy water on it, or you put oil on it. So I started using oil on this stone. So I'm going to put oil on it again. And the first time you put oil on it, it's going to soak up a lot of oil. It's going to drink oil. It's going to absorb oil until the stone is full. So now I am going to establish my angle that I want. And it's very important that your posture allows you to do the exact same motion again and again and again. Because if you can't be sure that you're doing the same angle over and over and over again, you're going to do a wide variety of different angles. If you do it at this angle one time, and at that angle another time, and at that angle another time, you're going to get a rounded surface, because you're going to grind all of it. No good. So I'm doing this until when? Until I can feel that the wire edge moves to the other side, and also that the scratches are finer in texture. So I believe we're done on that side. Now the thing about carborundum and natural stones is they shed grit. That's actually a good thing, because the loose bits of stone or carborundum that are kind of sliding around, making a little slurry with the oil, they help you cut. As a matter of fact, there are certain kinds of stones, especially Japanese water stones, that are quite soft, and they shed grit really fast, and it's the slurry that's doing all the work. Okay. Well, I don't even know how I did. I can't feel it because there's so much grit on here that the sharpening stone has shed, and I have to wipe it off before I can know if we've gotten anywhere. All right, I think we've moved it. All right, well, that's one. Now, here is a sharpening stone that you should reject unless you just want to play around with it and see, or put a lot of work into it. When people sharpen, they should use the entire stone, and that way, if you always rub in the middle, you're gonna wear a saddle in it. Can you see that saddle? Can you see that it curves in like that? Okay. That's all good gritty surface, but it's changing the angle on you as you go down in the hollow and back up the other side. So that is it's really difficult to do a good job with a dish sharpening stone. What can you do about it? you can get a flat grinding surface and resurface the sharpening stone. That's a lot of work for an $8 sharpening stone. But you might do this, one, to get the experience, two, because waste not, want not, and three, maybe you don't want to spend $8. Maybe you want to take care of it yourself. Maybe you live really remotely, and you know, it's not the $8; it's the trip to the store that you don't want to make. Whatever. So be careful about that. You can wear them out to where they're no good. So all you have to do is just keep rotating the stone, use all parts of it, and make nice long strokes. Use the entire stone. The longer the stone, the easier it is to do a good job with the knife. Like this is a long kitchen knife. So it's hard to use a stone any shorter than this with a long tool, because by the time I've moved, you know, all the way down the length of the stone, I hope I'm done with the knife. Because if it's longer than that, I might have to do some of it and then come back and do the tip of it. It's really hard to get the same movement all the way up and down. So the longer the sharpening surface, the easier it's going to work. So this is doing just fine. So now I've got to get the grit size even smaller. This brings us to another material. These are diamond impregnated steel. So it isn't the steel that's doing the sharpening, it's the diamond particles. And the diamond particles, even if they didn't have little labels on the side, you could tell how rough they are with your fingernail. You could say, okay, that one's coarse, that one's medium, this one's fine, this one's extra fine. Extra fine, you can hardly feel any texture on it at all. But if you rubbed a piece of steel on it, it would get shiny with new exposed steel, so you know that you're cutting. All right, you can put oil on diamond stones. A lot of people put plain water on diamond stones. I don't bother, I just use them and then wash them every now and then. They don't clog up, but they do get dirty. So, easy enough to wash them. So let's see. I can feel my wire edge, and I can do the same exact thing. Now, you can sharpen on a sharpening stone or a diamond stone back and forth. With the file, you should never go back and forth. The problem with back and forth is that a lot of people would not be able to hold steadily. So most people do better work if they exactly repeat the motion over and over and over again. Okay, how do we do? Well, I can see that that surface is a lot shinier. Now, I have to introduce you to another tool that I really, really like for this. It's the same thing. It's diamond dust of the grit you want, impregnated into steel, except the steel is in the form of a rod. And so, remember I was saying that the longer the stone, the easier it is to do the whole knife? Well, how about a long cutting surface? This works great. Now, this is not the same as the steel that comes with your kitchen knives. Okay? That steel that comes with your kitchen knives, all it does, remember how I said steel is malleable and the molecules can squish past each other and move? Like when you push them off the edge or when you squish them by cutting on the ceramic plate? Okay. What you do with the butcher's steel is you push the molecules back in place. So a butcher will cut, and every few minutes touch the knives up with the steel. He's not cutting any steel off the knife, he's just lining the molecules back up. So you can take a knife that is properly sharp and use it all day if you use the steel and not have to grind any more steel off of it. If you use a knife all day long, day after day after day, and you were to sharpen it every time it wasn't at full performance, you would wear it down. You would have, I've seen lots of old kitchen knives and old, antique knives of all kinds. My grandfather used to do this. He would grind them down until they didn't look anything like the original blades. I have a couple of my grandfather's pocket knives. Um, so, um, this is a different thing. This is not a butcher's steel. This is actually a sharpening surface. And because it's long and it has a handle, you can use it like a file. And the file is a very comfortable movement to make because you can, you can work it comfortably and make the same movement easily. They get clogged. You have to wipe them every now and then. Alright. Yep, so I can feel my wire edge, and I can see the strip of steel that I've been grinding away at is getting, the scratches are getting finer and finer. In other words, the facet that I'm looking at is getting shinier and shinier. And the finer the grit that you use, the more that it's shiny and reflective. If I were to go to the extra fine after this fine, this is fine texture, that's fine texture. If I were to go to the extra fine, you should be able to see your reflection in it. And so now I'm going back the other side with the same tool. Okay, now I feel the wire edge back on this side. I can go to the extra fine. Nope, didn't wipe. Wipe off all the large grit before you go to the small grit. That's good and shiny. I find the diamonds to be the fastest. They're the most aggressive. They get more steel off faster. So the natural stones are the slowest, but they produce a gorgeous edge. And put it this way, that's what your great grandpa had to sharpen his pocket knife and his woodworking tools and such like that. He had natural stones, and he put his time in, and he did a good job, and his tools came out really sharp and just right, and it was perfect. So diamond isn't any better. It's faster, and it's more durable. If I drop my steel diamond stone on the floor, it's fine. I can just pick it up. If I drop a carborundum, or especially a natural grit sharpening stone on the floor, I could break it. Okay. So, when I examine this edge, you know what? There's still a wire edge. I didn't finish pushing it all the way over, but there's going to be a wire edge. I'm going to have to deal with it. It's a little smaller, but it's still there, and this is kind of the final stop as far as grit size. So what do? How do I get that wire edge off? Well, I don't feel it. If you are not precise in your angle, you could kind of knock it off or wipe it off or grind it off before you get to that point. If you're very steady, you may be able to feel it on there. I don't know where it went. All I know is, here's my test. I put it on my thumbnail, and I can't slide it. It's stuck. So, this thing is ready to cut anything I needed to cut. It would cut hair. You could shave somebody's head with it right now. So, yeah. So that's a sharp kitchen knife, and this is a nice old antique. I have a little sharpening service, and I set up at the farmers market, local farmers market in Sylva, North Carolina, and I have a lot of fun with it because the tools that people bring me to sharpen are not the $1.99 disposable crappy knives. They are heirlooms from their family, or high quality things they bought years ago, or something that's real special to them. They bring me tools that it's a privilege to work on, and I get them back to perfect usability, and wrap them back up in the newspaper for safekeeping and hand them back, and I know they're going to go back and be really happy using them because they're going to work really well. So kitchen knives, they're pretty simple and straightforward because they've got a good handle, the blade is straight with a little bit of a curve to it, it's easy to reach. What if you have a blade that is more difficult? Maybe because it's very small. Sorry. Yep. What if it's very small? So, I looked at this pocket knife before. This is a pretty small pocket knife. And this is the long blade. So let's look at the smallest blade. By the way, this is a blade shape that I really like to use. Okay, that won't happen again. Okay, this is a blade shape I really like to use for whittling and carving and small jobs like that. This is called a sheep's foot blade. And it is perfectly flat on the bottom and curves downward, kind of like the shape of a hoof. So that's a sheep's foot blade. And I can work on my sheep's foot blade and it's because it's so short, I've got to get my act together because the movements that I'm going to make are I don't have a lot of room to do it. Just going to go, because it's flat, I don't have to worry about curving with the curvature of the blade. It's perfectly flat. If I keep it steady and just go back and forth, I think that the angle that I'm holding it is not the angle. Okay, this is a good time to talk about that. Knives don't necessarily come with the edge angle that you want. They are made to a certain edge angle by the manufacturer, and that may or may not be the edge angle that you want. See, if you're cutting coarse, easy things or tough things, you might want a broad angle because it's harder to dull it. But if you're going to be doing careful whittling or woodworking, you want a really thin angle so that it will just whisper through the material and work really well. So chances are your pocket knife comes from the manufacturer with an edge angle that's too wide for you and you'd want to change it. How would you change it? I'd change it with the file. So look at the angle that it comes with. Not the main angle that the whole blade is made with, but the last little, what's called the micro bevel. And if you aren't planning on changing it, then you have to match it. You have to do what it says. And again, you go back to making the wire edge, managing your scratches, changing to a finer grit until you are done. But a short blade poses a little more, little trickier just because it's harder to work. You don't get to set yourself up and make a long motion. All right, now we have a problem. What about a knife whose blade doesn't curve outward, it curves inward? This is a paring knife that is a little curve like that. This is a great little paring knife. It's made by Victorinox, which makes Swiss Army knives. But if I lay this flat on a grindstone, the whole middle section of the blade isn't touching. So now I got a problem. How do you sharpen this? Well, you sharpen it with a rod that has curvature to it. You can sharpen it with a stone that has curvature to it too. You can get stones that are made to have a kind of a long rounded edge, and you can get into the curvature. But I like my diamond stick. And you just, same motion. Well, if I've gone far enough, then I have a wire edge. Okay, then I come back. Okay, there's another consideration. You're right-handed, using the tool, and your steadiest motion is pushing straight away from yourself. What do you do when you want to do the other side? Do you switch it to your left hand and then do the same motion with the left hand to do the other side? That's hard. Very few people are that ambidextrous to do a good job with that. Or do you flip it over and do an entirely different motion to draw it towards you to grind against the steel? I do this even though I am a little bit ambidextrous with tools, but I think this works out a little steadier for me. Now what you could do, because this is a long rod, let's treat it like a file, and you could have the knife away from you and file with it. And because it's a diamond and not really a file, you can rub back and forth without hurting anything. And then you can flip the knife over and still make the same exact motion. And the reason I really like these sharpening rods. And you can find these on Amazon, and you can find them in, like, Smoky Mountain Knife Works carries them. That's where I got my first one. And they are called diamond sticks, or diamond sharpening sticks. So choose your grit, choose your length. I mean, they make them in 6-inch and 8-inch and 10 and 12, I think. Alright, let's see. How'd we do? Oh, that's good. Yep, that's ready to peel apples or whatever it is you want to do with it. What about big tools? Okay. Here's my weeding sickle. I love this thing. This is such a cool tool. It's kind of an old traditional type of tool, and it works great. This one's actually imported from Italy. It's wonderful. It's hard to sharpen. It's very thin metal, which is what you want because you don't have to do much with it to get it sharp. But that's where the diamond stick comes in, because it'll reach into the inside of the curve. That's what's so good about it. you can feel that the diamond stick stops working once it clogs. But the good news is it's pretty easy to unclog it. I also find myself moving it left and right to get different parts of it into use. And I'm still looking for that wire edge. Now, this is different in sharpening. See that this raised ridge on the lead edge? It's there for strength, and it's also there for a guide as to how high you want to move the tools. That's about the angle that you use for sharpening. Okay, so if your sharpening tool touches the raised ridge every now and then, by the way, that's why old-fashioned straight razors have that kind of thick back and then they are hollow ground. It's so that when you lay it flat, the back guides the angle that it touches the edge. So that's ready. So now the problem is the back has the wire edge, but the back is just about flat, and it should be. So if I move the wire edge very much, then I have made a bevel on the back. I don't really want to make a bevel on the back. I want to just barely move that wire edge. Okay. I've noticed another little problem. It's a little corroded on the edge. See, it's one thing, you put away your knives inside your house, and you put them away clean, careful soap and water, not the dishwasher for fine knives. But agricultural tools typically have like a little bit of plant juices or something stuck on them, and they rust faster that way. And they get a patina of kind of gunk stuck on them. So sometimes you have to clean these edges. I have a tool recommendation. You're going to love this. This is called a knife eraser. And it is literally a rubber eraser with grit in it. So this is a tool you use to clean tarnish off a blade. And if you're careful, it doesn't disturb the edge at all, and it brings it back to clean. So if your knife is in really bad shape, you want to clean it first before you sharpen it. You get a better edge, and a clean piece of steel glides on the sharpening surface easier and doesn't clog it up so fast. It'll clean off rust and tarnish, residues, pitting. I mean, if you rubbed it directly on the blade you just sharpened, it would go ahead and dull it. But I love these things. I mean, you frequently will get a knife that's, you wouldn't really call it rusty, but it's not nice. It's got, even if the only thing's wrong with it is, the shiny finish is a little dulled. Not that the edge is dull, but that the finish is a little grayed to it. I mean, some knives come mirror polished, and you could bring a mirror polish back to it with the knife eraser. And again, they come in different grits, but I love them. They're not very expensive. They wear like an eraser wears out. You can use any part of it to get in anywhere. And I love my knife erasers. Yeah. Okay, so my weeding sickle's ready to go out and whisper through tall grass and cut things for me. Another tool that I have for heavier work, for brush cutting branches and things like that, is a brush hook. Another Italian-made tool. This is a really hard part to sharpen, that tight in curve. Well, I'm not going to touch it because it's really sharp right now. I sharpened it. So some of it is straight, and you can use it like a machete, but that hook is great. And I like the fact that it comes to a full right angle hook, because you can, without having to stay bent over to do all your cutting, you can reach down, get around a blackberry stem or a weed or something, hook it, and just pull up and cut it with the pull movement. It really saves your back. So I love these tools. They are so well designed. They're a real beautiful, beautiful looking, stacked leather handles. And I kind of like this hook. This hook is just to catch it on your pinky so you don't accidentally throw it so easily. Like if you're swinging and chopping, it could slide out of your hand. This will not slide out of your hand. You're holding it. So anyway, I love it. Every now and then the knife eraser has to get to work on this thing, but otherwise it's great. And yeah, it's razor sharp right now, ready to lop some branches. So nicks and chips, especially outdoor tools like pruners. Here's a pruner, probably met a piece of wire. We were pruning vines that were on a trellis with some fencing wire, and probably somebody could not see there was a wire strip inside the twisted vine and cut against the wire and broke a chip out. So I have two choices here. I could, when it's time to sharpen this tool, and it just was, I could just sharpen it to the best of its ability right now and put it back into service. And over time, I will slowly sharpen that notch away. Or if I really have to get it all the way out, like if it's a fine woodworking tool and I would leave grooves in what I'm making and I have to get it out, I will have to grind this down. I will have to file this until the notch is completely gone. Because it's a pruner, and because it's still got a large functional area, I decided to sharpen it a little bit now and get a little more done another time, and that's about it. So if it were a really fine tool that needed to be, like a butcher would not tolerate having a tool with dings out of it. He would probably throw the knife away, because he's not, a butcher is going to wear out knives, and the knives that he's buying are not going to be $150 knives. He's not a chef. He is a professional cutter. He's cutting. So he's going to use a tool until it is not able to be pushed back in line with the steel, and then he's going to throw it in a bin. And a lot of times, I believe, professional meat cutters just dump those at a bargain price and just buy new ones, because they're buying them wholesale. The knives that they're using are probably about $10 a knife, and they're going to use them and use them and use them and use them, and it wouldn't be worth the labor to bring those knives fully back into condition. So there may be bargains out there. I don't know. I don't know where to look for those things. So other tools, scissors are not as tricky as people make them out to be to sharpen. If you can open up the scissor and hold it steady, guess what? You have a long rod that can be held like a file, and you can just check the angle you want it at. Doesn't even usually take much. And then you check it. Did it make a bad wire edge? Very, very subtle, very light. One way that you can work on a wire edge is to put it on a very flat stone. Just lay it really flat. anyway, that's how you would do scissors. So one half is done. I just have to turn it around and do the other half. And scissors are not that difficult. Saws are difficult because you have to get the angle right on every single tooth. And just think about a carpenter saw has hundreds of teeth. So they make special clamps. This is the old-fashioned way to do it. Nowadays, it's hard to find anybody that sharpens them. And it's also hard to find saws whose tooth design is the right arrangement to let you in there with a little file so you could do it. They mostly make saws where you cut and you cut and you cut, and then you're supposed to throw the blade away and get another blade. Old-fashioned saws, you know, your great-grandfather would have thought you were crazy if you just threw the blade away because it got dull. You have to put it into a special clamp that puts it at bench height, and you're going to go down there, you're going to see which teeth. First of all, you have to set the teeth. They have to be one of them bent out to the left, one of them bent out to the right. The next one goes to the left, next one goes to the right, next one goes to the left. Because if all of your teeth were exactly lined up, your saw would clog when it cut. So you have to offset them so that when they cut, they have made a cut that's very slightly wider than the thickness of the saw. And that way it won't bind. So they tend to sag back in. So you have to reset them. And in a very old saw, you're liable to break teeth, in which case you're out of luck. And then you have to make sure they're all level, because you want all the teeth to contact the wood at the exact same moment. So you don't have one that's longer and one that's shorter. You grind them all flat, and then you sharpen them. And it's a 4-step process. And but it's exacting, but it's really satisfying to do. But it's not something I do for customers. But yeah, anything else? Kitchen knives, hunting knives, carving knives, woodworking tools, gardening tools, axes and hatchets and machetes and things like that I will do. And you can too, and you should. I should be out of business because people who own tools should take care of them themselves. I really believe that. But some people are busy, some people don't have the hand strength, some people don't have the time, some people would rather use their energy on other things. That's okay. I think we live better when we go with our strengths and help each other out, and live like a village, so to speak. So sharpening is really, 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 really worth it. A lot of people they say, "Oh, mine are fine." Well, if I took them and sharpened them and gave them back, they would notice the difference right away, and it would make a difference. So it's totally worth buying good tools, taking good care of them, maintaining them properly, and that's part of this kind of legacy of taking care of the world. Take care of your tools, take care of your possessions, take care of your yard, take care of your planet, and that will do it for today.